Welcome, everybody, to Taking Care of Business. Thank you for listening. You may be listening to us at tcbradio.com. You may be catching us on 89.7 FM. You may be catching us on iTunes or at tcbradio.mypodcast.com. But wherever you're listening to us, this is a show not to be missed, and you need to tell people that this is one of the best shows that you're going to catch on the radio. We have a phenomenal subject and phenomenal guests. First of all, welcome to my co-host, Paul Solomon, attorney at law as well.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the emails.
And I'm Richard Solomon, your host, attorney. And I actually have the authors of a book called A Criminal Injustice. Let me tell you something. I'm holding it right here. This book is so well written, and I can attest to that because I actually know how to write a little bit. And this book is so well written. It's A True Crime, A False Confession, and the Fight to Free Marty Tankleff by Richard Firstman and Jay Salpeter. This book is, once you hold on to this book and you start reading, I guarantee you that at nighttime you will struggle to stay awake no matter how tired you are because the book is so compelling. You have to read this. acriminalinjustice.com, published by Random House. And let's introduce our guests. First of all, thank you for being with us and spending your precious time with us. So, Jay, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having us, and thank you for that terrific plug on the book.
And don't stop.
And it was honest.
Right.
The best thing was 100% the truth.
I love it.
Because the book really talks about a lot of things that weren't really truthful back in time.
That's true, and still going on today, matter of fact, and we'll get into that later on out in Suffolk County. But as you said, the name is Jay Salpeter. I'm a retired New York City detective. I retired from the New York Police Department in 1991, and then I went in to become a private investigator. And it's been a wonderful career. I love investigating. I've been lucky enough to get some pretty good cases that, I've traveled all over. But there's never been a case like the one case A Criminal Injustice describes, the Marty Tankleff case. On December 21st, 2000, I received a letter from Marty Tankleff from prison asking me to help him and become, work as his private investigator, also for free.
Now I remember seeing that. Now, at what point in the timeline were you contacted? Was it after the conviction?
Oh, many years after the conviction.
Well, I think that's really important to note because,
Marty had been in jail for approximately 17, 18 years. Is that correct, Rich?
At that point, he'd been, just 10 at that point, 10 or 11, yeah.
Right. So, he contacted me. He wanted me to work as his private investigator. And I said, Jesus, Marty Tankleff, I remember that case. And I met with his family, and I decided to take a look at the case. December 21st, 2000, he wrote to me. On December 21st, 2007, the appellate court overturned his conviction. And the 7-year journey for me, was not as long as Marty's journey, but it was an unbelievable ride. In a million years, I could never expect what I was going to go through, the people I was going to meet, the people I had the opportunity to work with, which were Marty's wonderful defense attorney, Stephen Brager, Bruce Barquette, Barry Pollock, and there's about 40 more, and I don't think we have enough time for me to name Marty's legal team.
Well, if this is really good, what we'll do is we'll spill into another hour.
Sounds good to me.
So, Rich, tell us about your involvement here.
Well, I'm a journalist, writer, author. I worked at Newsday for 16 years, left there in 1995 to write books. And this book came along in 2003. I remembered the case from the late 80s. I had been in Newsday, although I hadn't covered the story, so I'd kind of followed it as any other reader, and kind of casually, and figured that Marty Tankleff was guilty. And so I always had this concept of him, you hear the name Marty Tankleff, you think, the psychotic rich kid, who slaughters his parents because he didn't like his car, and that was seared into, I think, our collective memories on Long Island. And when in 2003 I started to read in Newsday, my former home, that new evidence, new witnesses were coming forward, and it was back in court, and it looked like he may not be guilty, I was completely just bowled over by the idea that everything I thought may not be true, and the fact that this kid, no longer a kid, might have been in prison all these years for something he didn't do. And I followed the stories. I noticed the name Jay Salpeter and met him a few months later when I went down to the courthouse during the hearings to sort of scout out a possible book.
Out at Riverhead?
And met Jay and did not intend, if I was going to go ahead and do a book, I didn't intend to write it with anybody involved in the case. But we began to talk spent over the next few months, and I realized that the book would be much better if I worked with Jay, because he had this, the heart of the story in terms of coming back into court and getting the drive to get Marty out. Now, remember, this was late 2004. It was not at all clear that Jay and the attorneys were going to get him out. So for me as a journalist, I got to sort of be in on a story that was still unfolding, and it would go on for several more years. So I had this sort of inside look, and I was able to write from the inside. And, it turned out to be a great collaboration between Jay and I.
I got to ask a question, because this was a compelling part of the book for me. You're in jail. Yeah, you have the support of your family. You are convicted. You make all the appeals. You do everything. All you see is an uphill battle. You're in jail for more and more years. You're more and more cut off from society, information, etc. How did Marty keep hope going, optimism, the fight, when it just seemed so, like so insurmountable? How did he rally? I mean, you talk a lot about him in the book as a person, and he seemed to be a person of at least optimism, despite sort of the conditions. And I remember reading somewhere in the book where he says, like, he didn't want to make his jail cell too permanent. He didn't want to make it like
a home.
Like a home, because that's like almost conceding that.
Right.
Marty was visiting, and then that was Marty's attitude. I have to tell you, he's the most unique human being I have ever met. The strongest mentally is beyond belief, the strength that he had. Every day that Marty woke up was another day for Marty to work on his defense. He worked in the law library. I will guarantee you, I could bring Marty Tankleff to your office. He will teach you law.
Well, we always use the help.
Right, and believe me, someday you might be opening up a firm with him. Every day, Marty wrote letters to everyone, not only to private investigators, to retired judges, to lawyers, people anyone with regards to innocence, Barry Scheck, anyone he could find received a letter. Hundreds of thousands of letters, which he actually logged. I mean, it's an amazing story.
On a manual typewriter, no less, for in the earlier years.
And I have to tell you, when I received other letters from inmates after, Marty contacted me. And as soon as I would open them up, I would know if Marty had a handle on it, because the writing, I mean, the words, I mean, you know where it came from. But Marty is unique. And thank God he's back in society where he should never have left. I think we're going to see such a productive member coming back to our society, and he's going to be wonderful for everyone.
What was his source of strength? I mean, in one day, he's not only an orphan, but he's accused of murdering the very people who nurtured and sustained him, and he loved them from all accounts quite dearly. How do you keep? What was his inspiration? Where did he get his strength from? I hear that he had it, but where did it come from?
I think that
what did he draw upon?
I didn't know Marty, until he contacted me many years later, in 2001. But if you look at the history of Marty's family and now knowing Marty, I think the drive comes from his father, Seymour. I mean, Seymour was a very aggressive man, a very good business person, and Marty has a lot of those qualities. Marty is far from shy. That I will tell you, and that's why he is here today. He's terrific, and he gets it from his father, I believe.
You are listening to Taking Care of Business, broadcasting from the Abrams Communication on the campus of CW Post College. This is Richard Solomon, 89.7 FM, tcbradio.com, and tcbradio.mypodcast.com, and iTunes and all kinds of other great places. Rich, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I was just going to add that when I first met Marty, it was actually in the Nassau County Jail during the hearing. That's where he was being housed during the hearing. He was buoyant and personable, and the whole setting was just out of sync with the personality that I saw. And then then he was sent back upstate to prison when the first round of the appeal was rejected, and saw him at the real prison upstate. The Gothic medieval kind of looking
Right,
thing.
the one near Syracuse or something.
Yeah, right. But still, the same. He has something in him, and to this day I don't know what it is, that allowed him to get up every day and not only survive, but to do something that was eventually going to lead to his release. And it really is. It was quite amazing to talk to him one-on-one in that setting in the prison. Seeing all the others around him that were, what's wrong with this picture?
Rich, once our hearing started, when we were granting the new 440 motion, and for your listeners who don't know what a 440 motion is,
yeah, it's a good, yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you before you ask. The 440 motion, and I only learned because I became part of one. A 440 motion is newfound evidence that if basically that the person had at the initial trial it might have made a difference in the jury decision. So this was all new evidence that came out that the judge in Suffolk County granted Marty new hearing. And what's unusual, before we went into the hearing, everyone in the Suffolk County, many people in the Suffolk County legal community told Bruce Barquette, one of our attorneys, that we were going to lose. Amazing. Before you go into a courtroom, you're told you're going to lose. And you know what? They were right. But to get back to Marty's, demeanor, he lost, when I first met Marty, he lost every decision, every appeal. He was finished. He was exhausted. That's it. He's in jail for the rest of his life unless the case could be solved. And I told Marty, if you did it, do not waste my time or your family's time. I can't get you out of here. Well, to Marty's credit, Jay, worked for me. I didn't do it. But my 7-year run with Marty, we lost every possible decision, every motion in court.
If I didn't know the ending of the true story,
right.
During the book, I was like, it's like
Yeah.
you were shipwrecked, and then in the rowboat you're sinking, and then you go to land, and there's an earthquake, and then the volcano hits you, and then finally you go to some dry piece of land, and then wild wolves start biting your feet.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the frustrations of losing everything. I got down. The whole team. How could we lose this? We're bringing in a murderous son to testify. This one to testify. How are we going to lose? Everyone. I mean, honestly, the defense team. I'll tell you, we were broken for a while. Emotionally upset, except for one person, Marty Tankleff. Marty never wavered. Marty stood up, and the defense team stood up with him, and we kept going until the appellate court finally, a court did the right thing, saw the truth, saw that Marty was not the murderer of his parents, and freed Marty Tankleff. And if there's one person that inspired the team, believe it or not, it's the fellow that was in jail, and that's why we kept going.
So for the people out there who are listening, who may not have read the book, may not know the story, just in a nutshell, what happened in the very beginning? Marty wakes up one day and he finds a terrific tragedy in his home.
Well, you want to, Rick, take that?
Sure.
And all of a sudden, it's obvious that that's like a vortex where all of a sudden what was a, quote, normal Long Island life is now completely shattered. So why don't you start with that and take us through a little bit just to give our discussion like a little meaningful context.
Right. September 7th, 1988, Marty was actually the very first day of his senior year of high school. Gets up to go to school at about 6 in the morning, and he leaves his bedroom and he notices that there are lights on in the hallway that shouldn't be on. It's a long ranch house in Belterre, Long Island, which is right on the Sound north of Port Jefferson. Starts going through the house, lights are on, he gets to the middle of the house, he sees the front door is open, the alarm has not been set, lights everywhere, and eventually he makes his way into his father's study where there had been a big poker game the night before. His father's in an office chair with his throat cut, as doctor said, his head nearly decapitated, his brains exposed, bashed over the head. Marty calls 911. They give him instructions to try to stop the bleeding and send help. Marty backtracks to the other end of the house looking for his mother. He finds her dead on the floor in the master bedroom. She's motionless, doesn't go near her, but he knows she's dead. Within an hour and a half, the first detective on the scene was a man named Jim McCready, who we'll talk about more in a moment. He starts to talk to Marty. An hour later, Marty and McCready's partner are at police headquarters in Yaphank in Suffolk County in an interrogation room. 2 or 3 hours later, they emerge with McCready and Ryan saying that Marty Tankleff confessed to his parents' murders. Marty was arrested. Nearly 2 years later, he was prosecuted, tried, convicted, and sentenced to 50 years to life. And it's what happened before the murders, actually, that is one of the keys to this, because McCready, the detective, was widely known as a bad cop. He had been cited for perjury in a prior murder case. He was widely disliked, disrespected, even among other cops. And why he was still on the police force, let alone on the homicide squad, let alone lead detective on a double murder involving a 17-year-old kid, is actually now the subject of a civil suit by Marty Tankleff. Essentially, they decided Marty did it. And in Suffolk County in those days, what the homicide squad did was decide who did it pretty much on day one. And
Well, it saves a lot of time and investigation and money. You know.
it really does, yeah. And
But you get it back on the lawsuits.
and if you get a confession, it's even better. So what they would do is make sure they got a confession, and if they didn't get a confession, they would simply say they did. As shocking as that may sound.
I just was you can't see this on the air, but I was a little stunned by hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what they did. They did it in this case, and I'm sure they did it in others. I mean, there's evidence of it.
Just to give our audience some more background, how old would be the detective at the time this occurred? How many years was he on the force?
Well, McCready was I believe, in his around 40, in his early 40s. His partner, Ryan, somewhere around there. So they were veterans. And just going back to what was going on in Suffolk County, and this really was no secret. Newsday did a wonderful series back then in the mid-'80s called The Confession Takers, in which they did a computer analysis of homicide cases in Suffolk County and around the country, hundreds and hundreds of cases. They found that the Suffolk Homicide Squad had a confession rate of 94%. Right, 94%.
Did they have Jack Bauer working for them?
Well, yeah, they didn't need Jack Bauer.
They would have had Jack confess, believe me.
Other jurisdictions, as they found, varied between 50, 60% in a good year. So in the Suffolk County, of course, what they said was, well, we're that good, Clearly something else was going on, and what was going on was that they were fabricating confessions and then going on the stand and lying about it. There's no question about that. So I think Marty Tankleff was an injustice, a disaster waiting to happen, because you had McCready, and there really is more to the McCready story than simply a bad cop showing up at the scene, being arrogant, thinking, I know what happened here, and deciding who did it, which was actually what I thought for most of the time I worked on this book. And Jay and I would discuss it, and Jay had thought that McCready there was something else going on, and I sort of have come to the conclusion that he's right, that there was more going on, and Jay can talk about that.
You were listening to Taking Care of Business on tcbradio.com, 89.7 at WCWP, the Abrams Communication Center. So, Officer McCready, there was some information in the book about whether he was given some kind of money. Like there was one of the witnesses said that there was like $50,000, $100,000, $200,000. I heard all I may have read over that a little too fast, but maybe you can.
Well,
that was
some of that came out on the Dr. Phil show too, when we did the Dr. Phil show. But to go back for a second, where maybe your viewers don't know, but Marty's father was in partnership, and Marty's father basically supplied the business with the funds with Jerry Stewman, the Bagel King of Long Island.
And you actually had a little bit of trivia about bagels
Right.
in there, which is very cool. But you got
Right.
to read the book for that.
That's right. We won't get into bagels on our hour, So basically, Jerry Stewman was into Marty's father for over $400,000, and
That's a lot of money in those days.
A lot of money. It's still a lot of money these days.
Yes. Well, now, the
Right.
new economy, yeah.
Right. It's still a lot of money. I wish I had $400,000. But either way, Jerry owed him that money. And Seymour was a little upset with Jerry, some of his practices, business practices and habits, and was calling the loan in. And Jerry knew this. And the night of Seymour, Seymour, when he was assaulted, subsequently he didn't die for about another month. He went into a coma. And
Shows you how tough he was to fight that hard with those
Right.
devastating injuries. It really talks about his personality.
Right. And the last person to leave the card game that night, and it's not disputed, was Jerry Stewman. But, Rick said I have a different take on McCready and Stewman. I have no doubt in my mind, and I'm still hoping that it's going to come out, and I think we're not far away, that Marty Tankleff lived that night to be arrested.
Oh,
Okay.
Wow, that's big news. Wow,
Well, I
yeah.
mean,
Because in the book, the police kept on saying over and again, how could it be that he survived and all this? And
well, now
yeah.
with if you have read the book, which you
I
have,
have.
and I've been very glib about it on every station that I've spoken on Channel 12 on any of the shows 48 Hours. Detective McCready is part of this murder, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. I'm not frightened. I welcome anything that McCready wants to come at me with. He's part of this conspiracy. He testified at Marty's original trial that he didn't know Jerry Stewman.
And that turned out not to be the case.
That's right. I mean, during my investigation, I have found witnesses that came into the 440 hearing and testified that, with specifics where they knew each other, that Jerry Stewman and Detective McCready were friends. I have a witness that unfortunately would have been wonderful. She's listed. She's named in the book, but of course we have to protect her. Another name. She worked in the bagel store. Outright that Jerry Stewman and McCready were friends. That when Jerry Stewman disappeared, and we'll get into that.
Oh, the fake suicide.
Right.
Yeah.
That they knew where he was all along, and the fellow that went to get him was McCready. Now,
and he was never prosecuted for faking his own death.
No, nothing.
No. An insurance scam,
Yeah,
an
nothing.
insurance job.
It's amazing because he went around saying, "I did it for the money to help my family," and I'm like, isn't that admitting to some kind of problem?
Well, I guess they said that he didn't actually file, and there were no insurance claims filed, so there was an actual fraud. I would think. Well, how about the most simple thing? The plates on his car that he left running to make it look like he'd been abducted were stolen,
Right. There's something there. So
and he got a free pass for that. Why?
it's a good
Well,
question.
why did Jerry Stewman run? Why did he take off? Why? I mean, it's common sense, too. Arlene Tankleff died that night. Marty's mother died.
Murdered. Yeah.
Right. Due to her assault. Now, what happens is, like I said, Seymour went into a coma. He didn't come back. He never regained consciousness. But why did Jerry take off? Marty Tankleff calls 911. If Marty Tankleff didn't call 911, took off, everyone would know Marty is the murderer. Well, Marty calls 911. If he still is the murderer, I mean, his father's head is half cut off, unfortunately. His skull is open. The brain matter is coming out. By the time the ambulance and the police came, finish him off. He was not far from death, right? But he called for help. Jerry Stewman ran. Why did he run? Well, I would think, common sense, if Seymour regained consciousness, he would tell the police what happened in that house that day.
Well, I got to ask a grim question. Why didn't the killers finish him off? Why didn't they finish the job?
Well, I've never...
And was there a struggle? I mean,
I don't think with him.
No, not with Seymour. Seymour was sitting at his desk. And if I could put a scenario together,
please.
And it's just my scenario. I was not in there.
Right.
And, as you know, I'm sure you've spoken to detectives before. When I get a new crime or when I investigate a crime, we always, the squad, the guys talk over, it could have happened this way, that way. We try to get different scenarios. So this is my scenario. I was not there. But I think by the crime scene, I could put a little of it together. Seymour is found at his chair by Marty. in horrible condition. He was probably talking to the last person that left that night, or did he leave? Jerry Stewman. His attention, as I'm looking at you, I'm talking to you as Seymour was talking to Jerry. From the back, the sliding glass doors. That's where Joe Creedon, Peter Kent entered. It's my belief. And they got him, like you see in the Mafia movies, right behind, and they almost took his actually almost had his head off. Why didn't he die? I think, hopefully someday I'll be able to ask, but I think they thought he was going to die. I mean, he was, if you looked at what Seymour looked like, how could anyone, survive that?
So in the book, you guys talk about the fact that the police said that Seymour fingered Marty, like as a deathbed confession kind of thing. What actually happened with that? Because that, it's almost taken as a matter of fact that somehow if he was really that bad, he was always in a coma. They said, no, he fingered Marty, and
I'm gonna let Rick get to that, but I want to just, before I let Rick go to that part, I just want to say I was a detective many years. I took many confessions. I was in the room taking confessions or interviewing possible perpetrators of the crime. One thing you like to get in a confession, which is you like to get consistency, that it's consistent with what happened in the crime scene. This is not Marty's confession. I've never said, and he didn't confess. What you read is Detective McCready's version of the crime. There is not one thing in this confession that is consistent with the crime scene.
Yeah, like I remember what you guys were talking about, like, for example, that the police said that Marty washed all the blood off, and yet when you went into the sink to find the blood, there was no blood.
Well, let's go back to the beginning of what they claim that he said he did and how. All right, they have a knife from the kitchen.
The watermelon knife.
Right. It was sitting next to a watermelon, and a barbell from his room. And they claim that he picked these various implements up, and he went back and forth. They had him going back and forth between the two crime scenes, and it's, as I said, a long ranch house, white carpeting in the middle. They said that he told them he did it naked so he wouldn't have any blood in his clothes. Okay, so now you've got the scenario of Marty naked. He's got to have blood all over him, dripping. He's got a bloody knife. I mean, and the viciousness of the crime has got to be blood and body tissue and all the crevices of this knife with a wooden handle, a kitchen knife. And then the threading of the barbell. Not one drop of blood between these two crime scenes. How can that be? They take apart the knife completely, just into pieces, inspect it microscopically, and a whole round of chemical tests. No blood or body tissue. How can that be? Barbell, the same thing. Okay, the shower. They said he washed everything, including his own body, in the shower. They remove the plumbing from the house and bring it to the crime lab.
No blood.
The drain, right, with residual water and soap scum and hair. No blood or body tissue. Nothing. This is This is not just looking at it. This is microscopically and several rounds of different kinds of chemical tests. All negative, and no blood anywhere. So there's not a single. As Jay said, there's not a single thing that corroborates. Yeah. There's not a single piece of physical evidence that corroborates anything in the confession. To the contrary, it really disproves it.
Exonerates him.
It shows that this was McCready's version because he spoke to Marty at the scene, went back in the house. This is by his own, testimony. Went back into the house. 10 minutes, looks around. He sees this knife. There's got a little pinkish material on it, which turned out to be watermelon, not surprisingly, since it was sitting next to a watermelon. Sees the barbell in the room, comes up with this, and the arrogance, right, of to sort of look around, figure that's what happened, and then actually fabricate, suggest to Marty, you did it with the knife, right, and making him say these things, or acknowledge, and basically his acknowledgement was, no, I didn't do it, but they kept at him, and he started to question his own sanity.
And now we're going to get to the part where Richard asked the question 10 minutes
yes,
ago.
we always come back to your question eventually.
Right.
I'm a patient man.
During this interrogation, they worked up to the point where they are increasingly aggressive, which is fine, accusatory, telling him they don't believe what he's saying, and saying that can't be true because of, we know that you say you took a shower last night before you went to bed. We know you took a shower this morning. We did a humidity test. We could prove it. A humidity test. What? There's no humidity test, right? We found your hair in your mother's hands, as if in an hour they have hair. They went to sent it to the crime lab. It's been analyzed. I know, right?
And they'd have a sample from him.
Marty's 7, right? Yeah. Marty's 17. He's in shock. These things could sound. He doesn't know what to think. And then the big finish from McCready. He gets up at a very opportune time. He walks out into the squad room, and he places a phone call from one extension to the next to another, picks it up, and fakes a conversation as if he's getting a call from the hospital. And then he comes back in he leaves the door open in the interrogation room, comes back in, and Marty tells him he's standing over him. Says, that was the other detective at the hospital. Your father came out of it. They shot him full of adrenaline. He said that you did it. And Marty continues to, it's not true. It can't be. I don't know why he would say that. I'll take a lie detector test. We're not giving you a lie detector test. And they keep going. And they finally reach the point where they've got this kid questioning his own sanity. Could he have blacked out and done it?
And that's the science of false confessions.
This is classic false
confession.
confession.
And I saw the TV show that you did on false confessions.
Yeah.
Where you talk about that. But I have a question. Why was Marty not charged as a juvenile?
Well, he was 17, so it's
16 would be.
Is that right?
16.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you see what's very interesting. This sounds wonderful, Rich, doesn't it? All these great things. But you know what? What we're telling you, the jury heard, and Marty was still convicted.
Yeah.
But you know what it's like? I'll tell you what it's like. You go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. You're there for a speeding ticket. You go to like Staten Island, for example, and I was like number 57 representing somebody, and I saw 56 guilties in a row. And the woman before me was a very nice woman. They accused her of going at 80 miles an hour at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the Staten Island Expressway, and she said to the judge very, very convincingly, "Every day I'm on that roadway, there is very heavy traffic. You cannot do 80 miles an hour if your life depended on it and you needed to flee for safety." Judge bangs the gavel. Guilty, clear and convincing evidence. License suspended. And you knew they just rubber stamp everything, and too often I think society just takes whatever they put in front of you that's authoritative, and it's just rubber stamped and packaged, and that's it.
Yes, it's actually very. You take a sort of a relatively innocuous case of a speeding ticket, or even if she lost her license for a while, she didn't lose her freedom. But the point is the same, and it really kind of shows how monstrous this was, because that standard really did apply here. This jury actually did take what they were they were seeing something that they considered authoritative. Policemen on the witness stand saying that Marty Tankleff confessed, and they've got all this evidence saying that he didn't, but they go with the cops.
Well, but did Marty's father ever have one moment of real consciousness?
No.
Never.
So how did they ever? Was that just a media ploy that they had, that they said Marty's father?
The detective was playing a game. I mean, detectives can lie. You know, as McCready will say on television, I mean, the Constitution and everyone, I'm allowed to lie. And he lied. But he's allowed to trick in an interrogation. But if you're going to trick, you really want to still come out with the proof and the evidence that you have the right person. Marty never confessed still. All he is saying after this nonsense by McCready was, well, could it have been a different Marty? You know, my father never lies to me. Could there have been another? Is there another Marty? You know, meaning multiple personalities probably with him. He was so confused.
You know, and another point here is you know, Jay just quoted some testimony and a possibility of what was said in that interrogation room. We don't know. We'll never know what really was said by whom. in that room because there was no videotaping, audio tape, there was no record, which is really unconscionable in this day and age. Well, in that day and age too.
Yeah,
I mean, it
even
was
in those days, yeah.
widely
Well, they're
used.
fighting for that.
There's
now.
always a cassette recorder. I mean,
At
yeah.
least.
Yeah.
But videotaping by that point was widely used. And the reason they didn't use it in Suffolk County was that they don't want you to know what's going on in there. They admit that. They don't want you to see what happens in there. And, this whole thing about blacking out and another Marty Tankleff, we really don't know what Marty said because a lot of this still comes from the detectives testifying that he said, it was another Marty Tankleff. And so none of it is trustworthy.
So, okay. How big was Seymour in terms of height and weight, and how big is Marty in terms of height and weight?
Marty was a little pipsqueak. His mother was a nice-sized woman. She had some weight. She was a big lady.
And very strong, tough.
Right. Tennis player, an athlete. And Seymour was an overweight, strong man himself. Any one of those two people could have knocked Marty with one hand, put him in the air.
Particularly,
I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, even if you think that he, I was going to say that if he came around the back from his father and his father didn't see him, maybe. But they have in this so-called confession, they have him going in, and in front of his father, and his father saying, "Marty, what are you doing with that knife?" And
He lets him walk around the back. I mean,
and then his mother clearly had there was a huge struggle. There were many defensive wounds. The patterns of the blood, where her body was, show that there was a mighty struggle. So whoever killed her, it is virtually impossible that person would not have indications of this crime. And Marty had literally not a scratch on him.
This case kind of hits home for me because a number of years ago I actually worked on a murder-suicide case on the civil side in which I'm going to keep all the names. It was north of New York. I'll just leave it at that. And basically, a husband and wife, they were on their second marriages each. The husband choked with his own hands the woman until she died. Then he went to the basement and shot himself. But in order to prove the wrongful death at the trial, we had to have the crime scene people. They talked about the struggle. They talked about the bruising of the neck and and all the elements of with the carpet. So having been through that as a lawyer, and having talked to investigators and the coroner, it's amazing. And yet, having had that experience and reading the book, I saw such a disconnect between I saw how the jury deliberated, and they looked at 210 out of 250 exhibits or something like that, and they seemed to have taken some time.
It took a lot of time.
Right. They seem to have taken the sufficient amount of time, and yet, when you see how the verdict was delivered, you're blown away. Yeah, I mean, you're totally blown away. He was like not guilty on 1 and guilty on 3 or something like that.
Well, and even more than that, there were enough statements by the jurors, some of them to reporters in the days afterward, but also an interview that a private investigator back at the time, years before Jay was involved, right after the trial, private investigator for the defense, who interviewed one of the jurors on tape. This juror was a few months later, and this juror by then was having real second thoughts, but explained how they came to their conclusions and how they went from being split at the beginning to full guilty, and we have a transcript of that interview, and it really reveals a lot of just poor reasoning, a lack of understanding of the most basic legal concepts, such as what is reasonable doubt. I mean, if this isn't reasonable doubt, I don't know what is. And the burden of proof. The prosecution has to prove its case. The defense doesn't have to prove anything. And so, that's the other half of this. I don't know if it's half, but it's another big piece. That the jury, they had a jury of people who just did a really bad job.
I know there was a Batson challenge. That's when the jury is not as diverse as it should be, and that seemed to have been just sort of disregarded. It's like all the motions were really disregarded.
Marty lost every motion. Once Marty was convicted, never won. and he had some of the best attorneys in the United States. He was finished. Every legal remedy was gone for Marty.
What was interesting as a lawyer, I read some of in your book, like the appellate decisions, for example, and you get all excited. Wow, the brief is saying this, and they got these arguments, and you got this all like this feeling. Wow, they're going to do it. They're really. This is the part.
That's what I told you too. How we felt.
Yeah, but you really feel like no, this is it. This is now the part of the book where it's going to happen and turn, and then it's like total rejected, and you're as the reader, you're like, I can't believe this.
Well, then you must have noticed you had 300 more pages to read.
But that was the part. I figured there was more of where are they now kind of stuff or something like that. I didn't realize that there was,
never ending.
Well, you're talking about Judge Braslow, the Suffolk County judge, who rejected the motion. So it wasn't quite. There were not 300 pages left at that point. But yeah, it is astounding, and really outrageous that this judge in Suffolk County rejected this motion for the new trial with the evidence that he heard. And as Jay mentioned, the lawyers for the defense were told by people in Suffolk County in the system, in the criminal justice system, that the plan is they're going to let you, they're going to bleed you dry and get everything in, and then they're going to reject you and send, they'll never see Marty Tankleff again. And what they didn't count on was that Jay and then the lawyers were going to keep coming up with more and more witnesses, people coming forward, Jay finding people, and
flying to Florida,
and this hearing that was supposed to go on for a couple of weeks went on for a year and a half. I mean, not every day for a year and a half, but
we were supposed to get 2 weeks, right? And we were there for a year and a half.
So you had this judge making this decision, and you were reading in the book, and you're thinking, how can this be? Well, it can be because the fix was in. I mean, this judge, it was a whole political piece to this. Where that this was a decision made before it was done, and when it was overturned eventually by real judges sitting in Brooklyn, the appellate division, their decision overturning Braslow had language that you just don't see at all from when a case is overturned. This was unanimous, and the judges went through his decision, and you can read between the lines, and you can imagine them thinking, did this guy even go to law school? And they're talking about a judge.
You know what's sad, and I'm a practicing lawyer and I go to the trial court, so I have to be somewhat careful. But it is amazing how many poorly written decisions or no decisions are out there. There's a concept in the law that you really need to have a rationale for your decision. And I had the good fortune once of meeting Milton Mullen, who was the former Chief Justice of the New York State court system. And he said, he was our mediator in a commercial case, and he said it was his policy that every case, even if it was just one sentence, 2 sentences, just to explain to people why they won or lost. What was the case? Many times now you get some kind of form-driven thing, and all it just says is, affirm, denied, affirm without cause. I mean, that's it, or denied without cause. And there's no explanation or anything like that. In fact, just to go back to the DMV, I had a case not long ago where we lost, and it was just the same thing. I had them on the evidence. I had them on identity. I had them on all these issues. I brought a brief to me to the DMV thing, and I put it down. I read all these cases into the record. The judge ignored everything and said guilty. And he didn't even look at the case names. He didn't analyze anything. The tickets were in the name of one company, but it was written another way, and the notes of the officer said something else. And I said, look, clear and convincing evidence was not met here. And I went through this whole thing, rubber stamps it, $8,000 fine. So then I appeal it to the Motor Vehicle Board because it's worth for $8,000 to do it. I get a form letter that just says we reviewed it and done. And I felt, my God. So now I went to the Supreme Court, and I'm doing an Article 78. Same thing, is I'm hoping that a real judge will say, look, you can't just rubber stamp everybody is guilty just because you need the money.
Oh, I'll tell you, Rich, Selma, Alabama is alive in Suffolk County. To its credit, Selma, Alabama, is normal now. They came around with their justice system. Nobody realizes, unless you work out or become part of that system in Suffolk County, what is going on out there. I mean, it's like the Wild West out there, right in the courts, and it's been going on for years. And for some reason, it just does not get stopped out there.
what is the real problem? Is it an entrenched bureaucracy? Is it sort of an old boy network? Is it just sort of like a cabal of people who just run things and they want it run the certain way? And if you don't,
I think it's the old boy network.
And with a little cabal mixed in.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out to our audience, like here we have a judge, but think about the next judge's election, which most of us blow off. You know,
I vote in every election.
no, but many people think it's not worthy because it's judges, and then you see pick 6 of any 6. And you may have voted for this judge that was involved in the case and not even realized it.
Yeah, it's funny because Paul makes a good point. When you go to vote in Queens, it says pick any 3. It's amazing because some of the judges are running on all the lines. They're running as Republicans, Democrats,
Yeah, that's very
liberals,
common.
and independents, and there's only 3. So you kind of get the impression if those 3 people woke up, had their cup of coffee, made it to the polling booth, and voted for themselves, they're in.
Well, in Suffolk County, Braslow is a familiar name, right, Rick? I mean,
Well, his father is a power broker for a long time, and was actually there are all sorts of interconnections with this. You may ask why. Well, why did he rule this way? What's in it for him to make such a corrupt ruling? And the answer is that his father was a big Democratic boss out there. It's the reason Judge Braslow is a judge. And Braslow Sr. brought Tom Spota, who's the DA, over to the Democratic Party because Spota was a Republican, and the previous DA was Catterson, also a Republican. And in order for Spota to become DA, he would have to switch parties because he's not going to beat the guy in his own party. So they convinced him to come over. He becomes a Democrat. So now Braslow's father who shares an office with the head of the Democratic Party, the official head, they have Spota, and now they've got this case, and so it's all kind of fits together, and with all these conflicts of interest, and the conflict for Spota is that he was Jim McCready's attorney when he was in private practice before he became DA. McCready was arrested for a vicious assault on St. Patrick's Day in 1994 after he retired from the police force. And this was a felony assault. And he would have gone to state prison if he'd been convicted. His attorney was Tom Spota. Tom Spota also defended McCready and other detectives when they were being investigated by the State Investigation Commission in the 1980s for their policies and conduct in homicide investigations. So now, all these years later, Tom Spota is the DA. So do you think he might have a little conflict of interest there? And does he step down? Does the judge ask him to step down when the defense files a motion to have a special prosecutor appointed? None of that happens.
So how do lawyers actually navigate through a lot of this stuff, try to get good results for their clients and not get eaten up by the system?
Well, I think in Marty's case, the lawyers did a terrific job. Bruce Barquette and Barry Pollack, who handled the 440 hearing, it went on. They put it on the record. That's what they were working for. Just put everything on the record. And thank God the appellate court, when they received, the papers, they overturned the conviction. But I'll tell you, Rich, Suffolk County, I mean, what they put us through mentally, with their lies, their posturing. I became a target, and I believe I still am in certain respects. I mean, with Lenny Lato, who was the district attorney that handled the case with Spota, it was amazing that I'm bribing witnesses. These allegations, if I had the recourse to sue a DA, but I can't. I mean, the lies that he was, posturing towards me and other members of the defense team were horrible. That the people were coming up here for free trips to Long Island, to Suffolk County. This is what they're going to come up here and lie to. Their 10 minutes of fame. They came up here, to their credit, some of our witnesses. We could not offer them immunity. We could not offer them protection. And we would have had a more diligent hearing, but many people were afraid to come forward.
Nor
but
could you intimidate them.
Right, but you know what they were afraid of? They were afraid of the district attorney's office. That's what they were afraid of. They were not afraid of retribution from the people that we named as the murderers, Joe Creedon and Peter Kent. They were fearful of Tom Spota's office.
Wow. So where are all these people today?
Right here out in Long Island. let's put it this way. Let's do a little biography. Joe Cretin lives and resides, of course, out in Suffolk County. Still do not know what he does for a living. I'd love to know what he gets up every day, and does he go to work? Does he file his taxes? He is protected by Suffolk County. Peter Kent today is living in Suffolk County. Glenn Harris is living in Suffolk County. Jerry Stewman, of course, the Bagel King, is living in a wonderful gated community in Boca Raton, Florida. Very affluent man, and none of these people have a fear in the world because they are still being protected. And why they're being protected? Because this is over one thing, Rich: drugs.
How so? I mean, explain to the audience.
Sure. Drugs were being sold out of the back of the bagel store. We have a witness who the New York State Attorney General also used, and the state investigation used, that had a business in the strip mall where the bagel store was. He would sleep there overnight, and he would be out, and he also did security for another business there. He observed, and he spoke to detectives, off-duty detectives, off-duty police officers who guarded that bagel store while the drug operation was going on overnight. And Joe Cretin, who we named as one of the murderers, testified, for the district attorney's office that, yes, he did security and he did collections for these people.
Yeah, the drugs is irrefutable. Jerry Stewarman's son, Todd, was a well-known drug dealer. He was out of the bagel store. It was a retail operation for drugs.
So I guess that's what they use the poppy seeds for.
Well, there's a line in the book that people would leave with the little containers with white material that was not cream cheese. And he was arrested twice and sent to prison for 7 years. Todd Stewarman. So this is we're now making up that there was a big drug business. The key here is the protection, which was also known in the around town at that time, but the protection involving detectives and this witness that Jay just mentioned identified Jim McCready as one of those off-duty cops protecting the business. So it all kind of comes together.
And your listeners should know that we're not sitting here making this up. If you read the book,
which is incredibly detailed,
right?
This book is really.
We
detailed.
just don't have time to go through how we can back this up. I worked the case for 7 years. I know everything about this case. I know everything about, what was going on in the bagel store. I just wish our Attorney General, would be a little more cognizant of the fact that two people are still murdered, Seymour and Arlene Tankleff, and I have no doubt that Andrew Cuomo, should be concentrating a little more on resolving the issue of arresting the people and letting the people of Suffolk County hear our evidence before a grand jury and do that rather than, trying to benefit for his political gains.
The suppression of the truth, we've been talking about how the DA and the judge and the Suffolk County criminal justice system has in keeping Marty Tankleff in prison and trying to keep him there, has covered up what really happened. But it is now extended beyond that to this day to the Attorney General, as Jay mentioned, Andrew Cuomo, who became the special prosecutor, was appointed after the convictions were overturned, and his job was to decide whether Marty would be retried, and then B, if not, should others be tried. He came back after 6 months of investigation with his staff and announced that Marty would not be retried.
I remember seeing that on the news. Yeah.
And
their investigation was basically, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, just that I get a little, upset when I hear about his investigation. His investigation was exactly what the district attorney's investigation was. Do not try to prove, who did this crime. Try to discredit the witnesses and the Tankleff investigator, and that's exactly how they came back.
Jay was following in their footsteps. He would, cause Jay knew everybody, all the witnesses. They're not coming up with any new witnesses. If they did, it would be good. But so Jay would be talking to them and asking, to find out what is the Attorney General doing. Have they interviewed you? And what he was finding was that they were interviewing people and with an agenda. In the way they were going at it, this one man, Dan Hayes, who was the one who saw the drug dealing, he was trying to give them all kinds of information that he knew firsthand because he was in business also with Seymour Tankleff, and had really crucial firsthand information about what happened here. They didn't care about that. All they kept saying, they heard something that Marty had steroids, which was one of the big myths of this case, because Marty ordered through a magazine some protein pills.
Well, if you saw what Marty looked like, he should have got his money back.
Yeah,
he was not on steroids.
But I mean, so the story went around that he was on steroids, roid rage, right? But he ordered through a magazine. Even you can't buy steroids through a magazine. And this guy Dan Hayes, who got the package in the mail because it was at this gym that they ran, he said it was laughable, that they were trying to make this, 20 years later, these investigators coming around.
Plus recantations.
And we trying to get him to, about the steroids. And he's saying, he told Jay, that I told them, it was crazy. It was ridiculous. That's why are you asking me this? This is 20 years ago. It was nonsense then, nonsense. So you could tell that they had an agenda, and that agenda was to present this as a case that was too confusing and too ambiguous to ever be solved. So let's just, we won't retry Marty Tankleff, and we're going to end it here, and that's the end of it. And I think it's the evidence is that Cuomo was doing the bidding of Suffolk County because of politics. He wants to be governor, and he wants friends in the Suffolk County Democratic Party, and he's willing to sacrifice justice, for his political ends.
Well, the other thing is this. American society seems to want just simple answers to complex problems. And it's very hard for to get people, jurors, and everyone to be motivated to do the hard work, to do the research. In fact, a lot of times when you go to court, you see motion papers that are 6 inches thick. And someone from the court says, what's this case about? And they look to the plaintiff, the people bringing the case, and they want a 15-second summary. He owes me money. And then they look to the other guy, and they say, well, what's your response? He screwed up the order. But it's not that simple. I mean, it's not that simple. And the problem is, if you look at TV and commercials and everything like that, we've been reduced to, no matter what the problem is, there's a simple, inexpensive cure, and we can move on. And your effort over 7 years shows what is really required. We only have 2 minutes, so I want to get a hold. Let's shift gears for a couple of seconds. Could you talk for about 30 seconds or so about the Innocence Project?
Well, once Marty was released, I along with Marty and another gentleman who just left the firm, we started the Fortress Innocence Group. It's based on prisoners like Marty write us letters, and we, of course, get back to them. If there's investigative factors, we will try to take their case. But they fill out a 22-page questionnaire. If, in fact, we find it credible or, that there's something we could do with it, we bring it to some of the large law firms and hope that, they will pay at that point for our investigation.
Now, do you have a phone number for the Innocence Group?
516-759-1511.
Now, I also understand you have a tip line for the case.
718-570-4183 in the tip line, because the case, until Marty's parents, there is closure with arrests. That case is still active, and I will always work on it until I finish and get these people arrested.
And in the last 30 seconds or so, I understand there's a blog on your website.
We have a website for the book, which is acriminalinjustice.com. And you can actually, if readers want to ask us questions or make comments, we have a blog on there. They can do that.
Wow. That was the fastest hour of radio I've been involved in my life. And you guys are incredible guests. If we can, I'd probably want to have you come back because I'd like to have more. And if you'll agree to that, I think that would just make my life.
We'd love to.
All right, cool.
Absolutely.
All right, you've been listening to Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon, Paul Solomon, Jay Salpeter, and Rick Frischman. Not Rick Frischman. He's somebody else. We'll see you all in a week. Thank you for listening. tcbradio.com. See you soon. Bye. Thanks.